Welcome to the New York City PowerShell virtual meetup. My name is Doug Fink. I'll be your host. And tonight we have James Brundage, who's going to talk about PowerShell, PipeScript, and the future. Looking forward to it. And before we get started, just a few things. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have Jan Egel. He'll be doing a presentation on getting started with dev containers in Visual Studio Code, and he's going to show how to do some things with PowerShell. Going to show about things with containers. Really cool stuff. Good things to learn. Ups your game, etc. And then next month, October, going to have Aaron Nelson join us, and he'll be talking about PowerShell runbooks and Azure automation accounts. He works for Microsoft. Used to be an MVP. He does some really cool things with PowerShell, and he works with runbooks, Azure functions, Kusto, and a whole bunch of things. So it's always interesting to see what he brings to the table. And on a last note, before we get started, I'll drop this into the chat. Head over to my YouTube channel, and you can see all the speakers I've had in the last year or so. Some really interesting concepts, really good information. You can drop in, take a look at a few of them, check out a few minutes of it, jump around. Popular videos to check out how PowerShell works and go a little bit deeper. So with that, just to let you know also, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and James will be watching it, so will I, and get questions answered as we go. So let's kick off with James. He thinks PowerShell is a great language. I agree. He's a former member of the PowerShell team. That's where I met him 100 years ago. He also created one of the first PowerShell consultancies called Start Automating, which is still in existence. He's been working with PowerShell for about 15 years. That's about a year longer than I have. And he's always got some interesting things to talk about. So James, if you're there.
I am here, and I swear with the waiting for COVID times, it's like 105 years at least since we, way back when I was on the PowerShell team and helped build the thing. So I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat some of the information that Doug just kind of ran over, but slide deck's got to start somewhere. So let's talk about PowerShell, PipeScript, and the future. And well, rehash a little bit of what we just said. I'm James with To Start Automating. I've done about 16 years of scripting at this point. Sorry for the bio update or the rounding error more appropriately. I helped build the PowerShell language way back when at Microsoft. Again, it feels like about 100 years ago, but it was only that long ago. And I went on and I formed one of the first PowerShell consultancies, and still kind of kicking. I have made a life's work out of growing the language and building out what people can do with PowerShell. It's very fun life's work. And today we're going to kind of discuss a big development in PowerShell programming. Now, before we get too far into that development, it'd be probably good to kind of set the stage with talking about programming in PowerShell. Starting with the good side. I personally believe that, the whole dev versus scripter debate is a bit of a misnomer. If you're building stuff in PowerShell, you are programming with PowerShell. It is a programming language like any other, and it is in fact a really wonderful programming language. It's full of these unique and useful capabilities, like the object pipeline doesn't really exist anywhere else. The extended type system doesn't really exist anywhere else. The command metadata I can get to in PowerShell is pretty unparalleled. Background jobs, that's not something most languages have out of the box. And it's got this incredibly flexible syntax, which allows for a lot more legal command formats than are actually used. It also works really wonderfully with .NET, and it can run on other exes. So, what's not to like? Again, as a programmer, these are all really compelling arguments. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a compiler. And this is actually something that really kind of stops it for a lot of people in terms of pure developer adoption, because if you don't have a compiler, then almost everything will fail when it runs, which means it'll fail in production. And this is a big thing to try to change to mature the language, and part of the subject of today's conversation. We'll get to it shortly. The other kind of thing that stinks about PowerShell is dogma dams adoption. Verb noun pairing may be the PowerShell way. It's something that we are taught to love and admire about PowerShell in the way that it kind of sorts the world for us. But noun verb pairing is the way of the CLI world. Like, it's get, add, get, remove, not remove, get. And this means that essentially in PowerShell, you're working in what feels like an alien ecosystem to other people. We don't need to be such strong adherents to this verb noun dogma and to the other formal rules of how PowerShell should be, because we can do a lot more with it than just that. Additionally, PowerShell can be pretty awkward for programmers, and that kind of brings us to what we would call the ugly. You know, PowerShell may be a 10, but it can make some programmers absolutely hate it. There's so much that it can do succinctly and so much that it can't. Like, awaiting long-running asynchronous returns, creating objects, comparing type and value. The list does go on and on. I had to actually fit like a top 3 into a slide, but yeah, it's not fun because it's unfamiliar and because it lacks basic simple things that other languages have kind of gotten to add over the years. And this can be done in PowerShell as a general rule, but it ends up being done in a very long-winded way. Like, I can write something like an await, but writing something like an await is a few lines that I have to add everywhere that I use it. So it ends up being very long-winded, and new technologies are tedious to integrate. New techniques are also difficult to standardize. One of the best examples for this is logging within scripts. There are a million and one ways people log within scripts in PowerShell, and it just gets really, really difficult to add a capability to all of them, or to add an improvement to a logging subsystem, because there's not a logging subsystem. There is not a standardized way of approaching things that you want to do in a script. And there should be. Luckily for us, this is a bit of history repeating. This is in fact what happens to successful scripting languages. JavaScript had faced the same underlying problem for a long time. It came out in 1995, and it got used everywhere. It's been basically ruling the client side of web scripting ever since. Then Node.js came out in 2009, and even though you already had a good 14 years of uncontrolled jungle-like growth, now you could build executables with this uncontrolled jungle-like growth. And that meant that inconsistency meant that crashes would happen. So what ended up coming out was TypeScript in 2012, and TypeScript had given something to JavaScript that it needed for 17 years, a transpiler. PowerShell came out in 2006, and PipeScript came out in 2022. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So this brings me to goals. We'll get into some demos and kind of talk through how it works in a second, but let's cover kind of what it's trying to do and what it is. TypeScript is designed to make programming more scriptable and scripting more programmable. It is transpiled into PowerShell, and this allows PowerShell to be built. TypeScript can also be embedded within any language, and that allows any language to be built. This lets us drastically open up the language of PowerShell itself, and we can also take the magic of PowerShell anywhere. And I'm actually running through a little bit faster than I thought I would be, but here we get to the nice free-form demo slide. Let's get a taste of what PipeScript can do. We're going to come back to each of these things and how each of these things works afterwards. Let's start off with keywords. Keywords are a good, simple concept to understand. Any command in PowerShell could be a keyword. Problem is that your PowerShell command has to be perfectly written in a particular way to support a very strict syntax. But you can instead take that abstract representation of the command that PowerShell will give you in its AST and change it into whatever you want. You can make any word in PowerShell basically represent the start of something custom. So we're going to go take a look at the keywords that have been added so far to PipeScript. We've got assert, await, new, and until. Not too many, but there will be more. Assert is really familiar. And, this is something that PowerShell has been lacking for a while. It's, if you're familiar with it in any other language, it is a compile time assertion that things are a particular way. It's essentially a built-in unit test. And what will happen is PipeScript will take this assert here and it will turn it into a double check of this thing, and then it will throw an error, but only if debug is passed or verbose is passed. So if I go ahead and
Hey, James, there we go.
oh yeah, sorry, I'm realizing I was showing the wrong screen for a second. So let me pull that over. So here we got our assert that would be displayed or would be running only if debug or verbose was passed. Okay. And here we're going to go ahead and run it. Before that, we're going to actually import the module and run it. And indeed, I actually get my assert because 1 is 1, or 1 is not equal to 1. So this adds a familiarity to other programmers to the language of PowerShell. I can use this with statements and messages. And it is not a real PowerShell function. What is happening is it's being turned into the code to do the assertion. Let's see if I have an example that does that. No, but let's write one real quick. Invoke PipeScript, as the name suggests, will take your script block and run it as PipeScript. But you can actually turn a given script block into PipeScript in a couple of different ways. The way that's happening underneath the covers is it's calling the PipeScript transpiler, which you can access with dot greater than PipeScript. I need to pass debug or verbose to have that actually output, because I did not before, it did not include the assertion. So you can see how it's using this as a build time condition. And there is the code that was actually generated for that assert. So the keyword here is interpreted and translated into more code. Kind of jumping to the next one here.
That's an example of how it transpiles.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's an example of both how it runs when it transpiles and it being transpiled and the output. One other way that you could do this, although in this case, it's probably not going to be the best of examples, is you can use the transpile method on any given script block. But because I don't have debug or verbose set, it wasn't including the assertion. So if I go ahead and set it, there it is. Going further down the list, one thing that just annoys the living crap out of a lot of developers and, honestly, about everybody from any language is, why does it have to be new object and why can't it just work? On the why does it have to be new object category, we have now got a new keyword. And that acts like new object, although it is not quite. Okay. By the way, this is a shorthand for invoke PipeScript. And that's me creating a date time with basically a min value. I can also go ahead and create something of a strong type. Put that in parentheses, get type to prove the point. There you go. I can also get a strongly typed array. Oh. Or I can have the demo gods curse me occasionally. We'll come back to that one in a second. I can also create property bags here. And in this case, because I don't have to change my debug preferences, also easy to show how this transpiles. This becomes PS custom object ordered thing. I can also give it my type name. Oh, and the demo gods curse me again. There we are.
I'll add an issue to the GitHub repo.
You can. I can also create strongly typed objects with basically a set of properties. What's especially nice is that I can actually also create things that use : create rather than new. Anybody that's done enough PowerShell is really used to writing something like this: script block create something instead of new script block. No, not anymore. Because this will simply look at the type that it has gotten for the first argument and see if it has create and do that. Another little example is the addition of an until loop. Now, technically PowerShell has had do until. This just allows you to write it at the top. Like, it's a pretty succinct compiler or transpiler. And this is what it will become. This also shows off something we're kind of skipping ahead to, double equals comparison. And has a few fun things you can do here, like basically wait a given time frame and wait for an event, which will become a little bit more complicated code. Or again, demo gods will slightly curse me. This is probably as good of a time to mention as any that this is a very new project and will continue to be improving over time, and it's very open to accept issues. Again, we'll see how much the demo gods curse what I'm trying to show off today. So that's just a taste of the keyword syntax and what we can do with it. Moving on, we've also got new syntax entirely. And this is fun here. In this, by the way, most of these directories will have the name and synopsis linked up with the actual example. Let's start with dotting because it's very fun. Dotting allows you to basically collect portions of an object. So this takes just the month, day, and year property of this. I can also go to just a single one of these. This is actually a pretty classic example because there's various ways that I can write this that'll be incorrect. I can say ABC 123, ABC 123 dot length, and I'll get the length of the array. I have to remember to for each over each of these things to get their length. I can assign that into a variable and I'd still get the length of each of them or of the array because the property exists on both. So this can be a disambiguating syntax. I can also run methods. So if I wanted to make a $1.99 rendered with toString and the culture of Great Britain, there you go. And I can just do this just about as easily in English too. I can also use this to basically derive conclusions from an object. When you use dot and a script block, you have essentially, it's a for each object that'll run on each of these things and produce that property. And again, we're going to go take a look at what it transpiles to. There's 1 to 5. There's what is basically a fast for each. And then I'm creating the PS custom object with each of these different pieces of the value. Okay. Oh, one other thing to note is that if you ever forget that it's not $underbar, in this case, it is also this. So make certain PowerShell scenarios easier this way. If there's any place where you find yourself constantly flubbing your PowerShell, I want to know, because it will be possible to transpile that away so that it's not flubbing anymore. Going on around here is when I kind of realized I can use this format to just create an object. So here is an example of that. And I can also use this to create a fairly complicated object. I'm going to show what's going on here. I've got an initial property with a constant value. In this case, the equals the big sign that I'm actually trying to set the pairing. Numbers followed by equals, and then a range expression. So there's the property, then there's numbers. Double, which is a script method because it has a param block, unless we don't see it. And even and odd numbers. And I can go ahead and assign the result of this output. O double 4 as an example. And if we go look at what it transpiled, it's quite a bit more code. But it does this in a very fast and efficient way, which is another advantage of being able to build your PowerShell. This sort of longer form PowerShell that does things very efficiently can be very tedious to write, and you can write something much shorter instead. So I think that's enough of dotting. So does this, because I'm down to equality comparison. And this is actually probably the best way to kind of start on how these things work. So we go to transpiler, syntax, equality comparison. The reason I love this one is it's just so short. So one thing that I have seen developers stub their toe on more times than I can count is the way that equality comparison works in PowerShell, that this simply does not work. It gives you an error that equal can't be recognized as a command, which isn't really helpful debugging. And so if you're coming from another language, it's like, what the heck's going on here, man? I don't know. So this is a real big stumbling block to PowerShell adoption, and it's really easy stumbling block to fix. All we need to do to fix this is basically transform one to the other. And I can do this with a very, very simple transpiler. And this is kind of how they work. We're going to come back to it in a later slide, but basically I take a particular ASC type from the pipeline as a mandatory parameter. And I use a validate script on the script block itself to determine if this is valid. So this will apply to any assignment statement as long as the right side matches, starting with equals and a white space, one or more, okay? And again, it's a real trivial transpiler. That was all of its setup. Here's its execution. Most of its examples are actually longer than its code. We take the left statement, we replace the equals with dash EQ and spaces, and we take the right statement, getting rid of that equal and its initial space. And this then returns a script block. And what will actually happen here is it'll say, when I find this and these things are valid, go run this and replace the content with the results of this script. And that's how the magic happens. I can transform any particular part of the abstract syntax tree in a very small amount of code. And I actually really got to thank Doug for bringing this particular bugaboo up. It was a very good example to write, and is a very, very powerful, show of what can be possible with this particular approach.
That's cool. Did you also, you implemented the triple equal sign like they have in JavaScript, or?
I did.
Oh,
I
happens to be
did.
the next example.
Yeah, and I think we'll just kind of show how much uglier that code is in a second. Okay. So I'm going to make this a quoted number, and you're going to see that this no longer runs. Oh, well. Now this is triple equals is equality and type comparison. And when I go look at what this transpiles to, it's a little bit longer. I got to check that both of them have get type because they could be nulls. I got to go check that the types are equal, and then I got to check the thing is the same. So it's a bit, just to get from point A to point B. But to somebody actually writing the code in PipeScript, it's just those triple equals. And if we wanted to take a look at that code, it's going to show how these things can get a little bit longer quick. The quality type comparison is this one. And yeah, not quite as short, about 100 lines. I think we're probably spending more time than we need to on this. So I'm just going to kind of skip over this one because it's barely used, and that's piped assignment. I'm going to go to regex literals real quick because they're a nice little quick show. But now you can basically start a string with slashes and end it with slashes, and it will become a regex. That's something a lot of languages have that it's nice to add to PowerShell. In addition to the robust PowerShell match operator support, there's more things you can do with extraction with a proper regex object. You could do this with all different types of strings. It will become the appropriate type of regex. It will also include the appropriate options. And it's really easy to show how you can kind of combine this into essentially an easy to use script. In this case, when I run this, I will get something that combines all different keyboards that I was looking for and returns or would match any double quoted string that has these keywords. Type a little bit, there we go. So basically any string or punctuation before and directly after these individual words, matching them in the document. So regex literals are nice, but this is actually kind of the tip of a cooler iceberg. One of the things you can do that is just kind of beautifully crazy is work with protocols. So you can, let's go to look at the older one, HTTP, and basically go ahead and just ask the GitHub API. This is a valid command in PipeScript, and it's actually going to go look, identify that there's this little chunk of it here, go look for protocols for HTTP and run it.
So that basically just did like an invoke REST method against that URL.
Yep, and in that case,
Awesome.
it's just about that simple. Though I could also say, use a different thing by passing invoker, which is not a parameter to this. It's basically saying what this will be to this keyword. So I could say invoker, invoke GitHub REST API if I want. So really nice, simple, powerful stuff. Also pretty beautifully flexible. I can use this get URL format, and this is actually very close to the examples you copy and paste from online. I can also embed variables in this. Because this is a legal PowerShell command. This here. So if I have strings here that basically have this, they'll be automatically replaced. Let's go ahead and again take a look at what its transpiled code looks like. There you go. So again, pretty crazy fun stuff. And one thing I kind of want to draw attention to is, well, what the protocol says about itself. This is a valid command, but so would this be. Protocols are incredibly promising because what we can do is basically say, here is the way we communicate with a whole set of stuff. You could have a protocol that talks to MQTT and be able to do anything that your, Alexa or Echo can do. Okay. You could have a protocol that talks to another language and be able to call another language and retrieve it back as objects in PowerShell. I want to get around to adding a protocol implementation for PowerShell remoting itself so that you could write that in that form. It's a very flexible, open-ended way to kind of extend language and put portions of it into namespaces. So protocols are cool. Also, as of literally today, there's also the UDP protocol. And I'll see if I have these all still set up, but I can also use this here, which will just become socket creation. I can send out a message. Oh, not transpiling it yet. So in this case, I'm going to transpile, and I'm going to put it in an extra set of parentheses and hit an ampersand onto it. And note that I didn't provide a port because I still have a typo in this one. And that now has sent a UDP message. Just show the transpiled code of that real quick. There we go. And on a much more complicated note, I can also basically receive the UDP results. I believe I still have this one open. So the first time you run this, it will actually create a job. The subsequent times you run this, it will receive the results of that job. So it's not going to keep the results unless you pass keep. Let's go ahead and send our message again. And this time receive and keep it. And do it again. There we are. And we can switch it all up and put it onto a different port. This will create a new job. There it is. And what I'm going to then be able to do is send my message with modifications. Since I get up to that example and change it. And there's a couple different ways I can get this back. I can receive the results. Or I can get event by that source identifier because it's being forwarded to this front space. And so there you are, easy-ish UDP communication. You don't have to write any of this. So the trade-off should be becoming clear at this point. Again, you can do a lot more with less code, but we're still not done. The real piece de resistance is attribute-based composition. So far we've covered stuff that happens kind of automatically whenever you run into anything in the language. You can also say, go use the specific thing and do this specific change. And there's probably no better example of that than the REST transpiler. What we're going to do here, pick that out to my examples. We are going to generate a script block that calls this REST API using this content type with this method and this parameter passed to the body. Okay. And then we're just going to go ahead and pick out the result and its probability and the label property. And we're going to pass the text wow. And this runs to that sentiment processing API, gives us the code to run it or to return the object, and gives us back exactly what it thinks wow is. And I'm constantly flabbergasted that it just says wow is only 52% positive. Let's try. This is really cool. Okay, at least now it's 60% sure it's positive. Again, if we wanted to look under the hood here, what's going on, it has quite a bit more code underneath the covers. But it has the property text defined as parameter and a way to actually get the input for the REST API and all the different variables to go and invoke it, and the ability to switch out an invoker and the content type and pushing the body content from whatever form we needed into that content type. So a little bit more than invoke REST method would naturally have, but there's a whole function without writing a function. And to go back to the example, I most certainly can actually write that as a function. You'll actually see this turned into get sentiment. And when I say attribute based composition, what I mean is here is an attribute that does not really exist on the script block. You can put attributes in PowerShell for whatever you'd like. If they do not exist as a real .NET type, then PipeScript will go ahead and say, hey, do I have something that could transform that? Okay, I do. Go ahead and take its parameters from this. And so you can have really complex code generation turned into just its input and basically fart out a whole function. I'm going over a lot really quickly because Doug had wanted me to actually be done by 45 minutes towards the end of the hour. So how are you guys all doing so far? This is a lot to take in.
If you got any questions, you can drop them in the chat. Everybody's still along for the ride.
Well, that's good. Okay.
So when you named it attribute, what is it? Attribute based
composition.
Did you name it ABC for a specific reason?
Yes, kitch points.
Kitch points. What are those?
Easy to remember, like connected
Cool.
to the simple things you're trying to get around to about this.
Mm-hmm.
So it is one of the ABCs of PipeScript by intent.
Excellent.
So
where's the files in GitHub?
Where are the files in GitHub? You're looking at this one. You're looking at the REST transpiler right here.
I'll drop that in. I'll drop a link into the chat for everybody.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to how this works in a second, but most of the transpiler directories are very nicely documented and have nice readmes linking everything together. Like if we go back to our keywords one here for a second, it gives you kind of the guidance of what you expect with the keyword and gives you all the examples found in all the files. And the same thing is true for syntax here. So you can really kind of poke around, see how it's working. Protocols also does every example there. It also explains why you'd be doing this way. We'll get back to the repo more. I just got to check what my next bullet point is. Yes, source generators. There we go. That's exactly where we were dancing around going in the repo. So see this directory inline. Remember I said I want to make scripting more programmable. Well, we've covered a lot of that. Making programming more scriptable. Well, I'd love to be able to generate a lot of different files with PowerShell. PowerShell is a great source generation language. It's great for metaprogramming. How do I do this in the most languages possible? Well, I standardize how I approach it. And for each of the languages in here, I was able to basically say, hey, here is a regular expression that says where I can start and stop embedding and how I'd like to embed PowerShell and how it will turn the output of that PowerShell into whatever format you'd like. So right now it covers 34 different languages, including Markdown. And it's generating me this nice table of this. So here we've got our README MD, and our source generator is our README PS1 MD. This is basically a template file for what will become a README MD. Okay. And I have a couple different ways that I can embed within Markdown. One of them is with triple ticks and dots greater than, less than, and a bracket. And the other one is with triple ticks or triple tildes and PipeScript and brackets. In this one, I'm basically using get transpiler to get a count. You'll see that I use PWD or the current directory because when these things run, they push into their location that they are built in. So you can do stuff like that. And this will generate the table and it will take all the transpilers in the current directory, do a good old select object and take out the language and synopsis and pattern. And this will give me the markdown table that we see below. So instead of having to write all of that each time, I literally write a for each loop or pipe over a bunch of objects to get it.
Do you have that? So an example of how to set that up as a GitHub action?
I do. I'm
You don't
not
have to go down.
to
We don't have to go down that
right now, but
we don't have to go down that
I
rabbit
actually
hole.
have been doing that all day. I'm using this in PipeScript.
Awesome. Yep, I could have used that about 6 months ago. Great.
Yeah. So this one's going to go build my module, and this one, at least the description, the text that it was trying to. So yeah, there are a bunch of files that have changed. There it went to go and push the changes, and all you needed to do is drop a readme.ps1md into your repo and reference PipeScript in your workflow. It's very nice like that. So that's what a source generator is. And again, I'm going to go back to how many languages we can do this in. At this point, it is 34. And it's quite a diverse list. I mean, we got some really old school stuff here. We got some webby stuff. We've got newer languages. And so we got Ada, we got Go, we got Atom, we got Bash, Basic, Batch, Bicep, C++, C#, CSS. You can put it into HTML in 3 different ways if you'd like. You can put it into R or Python. You could use this to generate an OpenSCAD file to make a 3D shape, or Markdown files to make a nice Markdown document. You could put it inside a YAML to be able to create your own GitHub workflows if you wanted to, though there are a few other ways to have to do that at this point. But it's really a flexible capability here to be able to just take any of these things and turn them into a script that you can generate, that language in. One of the best little examples of this is if you think about your standard interface that you have to implement in C# or any language. Normally you have an example code that does nothing but is a boilerplate for what somebody would need to do. Well, if you put in just a little bit of PipeScript to that boilerplate, then somebody would be able to treat that as a script to generate that kind of class. And that would be really powerful. Does that make sense to those that are willing to ask questions or co-hosts?
Makes sense to me. Anybody have questions on that?
Okay. Then I guess moving on. Let's see, back to our PowerPoint for a second. I believe that kind of covers most of the general bases that we wanted to at this point. We're going to kind of recap how PipeScript is working. It provides you.
So before you move on to that, so there's a lot of syntax that I like in Python. So like how they use the range command and things like that. So building something like a range command the way they do it, and they do some wacky things with the way they pass in there, begin, start, end type parameters to their range command. I could work that up in PipeScript pretty easy.
And if you work that up in PipeScript as a transpiler, what it would be doing would be taking the variations of that range command and turning them into raw PowerShell.
Interesting. Yep.
So you wouldn't actually have somebody who transpiles it using the range transpiler use that code as it was. You would have them transform it into, build it into their code. So basically you would not have a dependency on your module when you did that.
Gotcha. Even nicer. Cool.
So you can just go build your script with PipeScript plus Doug's module. All Doug's module would need to do is add his own transpiler and call it psx.ps1. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second again. But add his own transpiler, call it something psx.ps1, and tag PipeScript in his module manifest. And at that point, PipeScript, the next time it's imported, will pick up on that set of code. And away you go.
Sweet.
You can just build your own abstraction on top of the PowerShell language and save yourself the keystrokes, basically.
Exactly. Save yourself the keystrokes, the debug, the extra fat fingering, all the extra lines of code you'd have to write. I like it. Good.
Yeah. I mean, PowerShell was already a hell of a template language. This kind of puts that on overdrive. It's really, really useful for metaprogramming languages, especially when you're dealing with multiple languages in a single project. And nowadays, that's kind of every project. Like anything web is dealing with at least HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So there's 3 languages right there, right? And anything that you do with complex data files or say Markdown or TOML or YAML, those will also invariably involve parsing a little bit of not just your PowerShell and your source input, but the YAML or TOML. So this can abstract all of that and make it easier and act as a clearinghouse for a lot of new core functionality. But how it works.
Well, so I got a question. What is the equals app for PipeScript to say, let's say to Ubuntu?
The equals app.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not like, let me check that chat here for a second.
Hey, Joe, could you say a little bit more about that, Joe?
Yeah, I don't quite know what you mean there.
Yeah, we can get back to that. Or
yeah, yeah, I'm not quite sure what the equals app said. So what you'd be able to do with PipeScript, one of the main things you'd be able to do is to have conditional compilation on a given OS. So you could basically say there's a parameter transpiler that will let you validate that you are a given PS version. So you can't set that parameter or set that variable unless you're a given PS version, and you can very easily basically say, I am or am not Windows or Linux code. one of the kind of core dumb scenarios I wanted to kind of make happen with this, silly as it might be, is being able to do an if-def. And being able to have cross-platform code is definitely an important goal here. Again, it's trying to make scripting more programmable, and I should be able to say, here is one source script with, you know, a different implementation for, say, Bluetooth on Linux as on Windows or as on Mac. You know, that should be something that is possible and also, you know, abstracted from the scripter, so that they don't have to actually think through the details of each OS. They just use the transpiler or the module that publishes one. Okay, so how it works. It provides you this engine to write transpilers. Basically, any PSX, PS1 file describes a transpiler, and value from pipeline inputs determine what's going to be transpiled. And this is really open-ended by design. Literally anything could be transpiled. You want to turn numbers into strings, you could, easy. If you want to turn a bunch of complex logs into some other type of object, again, you could describe this in a transpiler easily. So this is trying to give a framework to be able to declare these so that we can actually use them in a variety of ways. Many of the transpilers will convert an abstract syntax tree element. And if you're not familiar with this, basically PowerShell has this beautiful thing called the abstract syntax tree. It is a fully parsed representation of the code that will run in PowerShell before it runs. And this means that you can basically determine, say, what command would be called before it is called, determine if that command would exist or not, which is how we're building keywords, and also determine essentially how to make your script build in whatever way you'd like, because you can figure out all the surrounding context of it. So the AST gives a kind of powerful baseline to kind of convert stuff. If I'm just walking through the entire abstract syntax tree of all of a given script block, item by item, I can just say, do I have a converter for this particular type? Is it valid? Okay, let's go. Validate script is used to determine if it's valid. So I'm going to go say over all the commands, going to go then check to see if it is this keyword. Nope, it's not that keyword. Nope, not that keyword. Nope, so on and so forth. So this gives us a way to not just have a thing that will transpile, you know, every instance of a word in PowerShell, but every instance of a word next to another word. And that, again, is really powerful because it gives us this context that we can use. And you wouldn't want to rewrite every single statement by accident, right? Like if I did something to transpile a pipeline, I wouldn't want to just accidentally rewrite every single pipeline that was there. So validate script and value from pipeline are kind of the core of how this works. And the core transpiler will walk the abstract syntax tree and convert what it can. And now we get to the other set of transpilers. Not all of them convert the AST. Right now, there are two other major types. There's inline transpilers, and these allow PipeScript to live in other languages. And there's protocol transpilers, and these allow PipeScript to communicate using a protocol, for instance, HTTP. And because we did so many things in our demo mode, you've now already seen both of them. So this is how we can just do HTTP or anything else. This is how we can actually allow PowerShell to be embedded in Markdown or be embedded in any other language that we would like. Again, it's really handy technology. It's very useful. It's fun stuff. Both types of these transpilers have opened up whole ecosystems, and more will be coming. And that's kind of the end of the road for where we're at right now with PipeScript. This whole project is very, very, very young. If I go to its release history, I believe it is only a few months old at this point. We're only 18 releases in.
Yeah, but how long have you been thinking about it?
Uh,
4 months?
so it's been out since June. That's a great question, and it's a really loaded one. I've been thinking about
Yeah.
what I would like to do to drive PowerShell forward and go into new territory with it for some time. I've been considering building a transpiler around PowerShell for probably 3-4 years, because of the number of spaces that it opens, because of the things that it allows one to do. That stated, it's really rapidly come together over the past several months and is kind of continuing to rapidly come together. The only kind of major blow to our time here. So you can see, like, we'd had first release June 20th, and we're releasing every few days after that. And then I got COVID.
Got it.
So
Couple of
yeah.
questions. A couple of questions in the chat. Do you want to read them, or I can read them? Can
Yeah,
PipeScript?
can PipeScript be used in Bash, and can it be installed in Ubuntu? Yes, it can be used in Bash. Yes, it can be installed in Ubuntu. In fact, actually, I kind of got you one better. I can also, let's do this one on the fly here. Or actually, I've got the code, might as well go to its examples. There are a couple of languages that it can be wrapped in. And one of the things you can do is wrap a script in Bash. So I can actually run this one directly. And I'm going to say here, Bash script block. So not only can I run it in Bash, I can use it to make Bash that'll run PowerShell. I can also pass it a script if I can get the right place. Let's do. Oh. So I can also call a regular script that way. And if you're a Bash aficionado, you'll note that basically this is calling the command and then passing the arguments as they were in Bash. And then returning 1 if there are any errors when it's done. So yeah, you can use it in Bash. In fact, one other thing that I'm just going to point out, even though it's a little bit, obvious in retrospect, this is being run on GitHub Workflows, and I'm just going to point out the name of this, step. It's test PowerShell on Linux. This is cross-platform implicitly. It will probably be primarily tested on Linux till the end of time, just because it is cheaper. I am cheap.
Excellent.
Yeah. The other thing to come back to is, again, it's usable as a GitHub action. So just to kind of demonstrate this point here, I'm going to git checkout main and git checkout the throwaway branch. And I'm going to go adding this line for a demo. Go add. And actually, let's give it I think the number between 1 and 10. And I am pretty lazy with how I remember these things. So I'm just going to go copy and paste this chunk up and then put in get random instead. Okay. Git add readme ps1 md git commit add commit. And push. Oh, don't have this as an upstream branch yet, so let's go ahead and do that.
So the quick 10,000 foot view of what's going to happen now.
It's going to go take this, run this code, find this little bit of PipeScript here, and give me a random number.
And that's all going to happen in what?
It's all going to happen in CI/CD.
So that's the GitHub action on GitHub.
Yep. We're going to go bring open this. We should have our action running, then adding demo commit. Then I'm going to delete my branch because yeah, I'm not checking that into main branch now.
Cool. So, and this is running across Ubuntu or several different Docker containers, or just
This is, I
Linux?
believe, running in Ubuntu Docker containers.
Okay.
So because that's, I believe, how basically how GitHub workflows work. So running on Ubuntu, and each step, I believe, or each job is within its own container.
Mm-hmm. All depends on how you set up your YAML. Yep. Cool. So you checked
But
it
yeah,
in. You checked it in.
It's running. It's building a few different things. It's building PipeScript right now. Looks like it finished. So I'm going to go ahead and git pull. And there's README, and README looks like it's already been replicated to docs by another module of mine called help out. And if I go open my
Let's go
README,
render that.
then I might need to close this out. And yeah, I do, because oh, the demo gods do not like me. It's using it to generate other things of this just fine, but looks like this one didn't embed properly. Oh, yeah. Oops. Forgot the cult brackets. To be very fair, this is something that is very standard. You're looking for essentially whatever the comment form in that language is, plus brackets, bracketing your code. Just some languages like Markdown, the comment forms can be a little bit weird or forced. So let's fix that. Now I'm editing the wrong file for a second. There is an institutional hazard, if there ever was one. So there's that. Made the commit. Nope. I can type, I swear. Okay. So we'll wait a second and let that go. And check the chat for a second. There should be a recording posted, yes. And one other thing here. Let's check the progress of our job, and then we can probably move to what's been done with it already and what can be done. So I'm building a module, it's building PipeScript right now. And this is going over all the files that need to be generated for PipeScript, and PipeScript itself does generate some files. I don't think I kind of harped on this, but the general pattern for those files is name of extension .ps or .ps1 followed by the normal extension. So .ps1.yaml, .ps1.md, etc. .ps1.cs. You can also use PipeScript to transpile a PowerShell script by using .ps1 ps1, which is a little confusing and annoying, but does work. So I'm gonna get pull. Oh, doesn't like that I changed the README locally, so I'm gonna get rid of that. And I'm gonna go look at my README here. And now I should have, there's my random number.
Interesting. Interesting.
So yeah, a lot of new toys to play with, a lot of new capability. This brings me to a question that I kind of keep asking myself. What have I done? I mean, with PipeScript so far. Well, we've already seen README PS1s are wonderful things. They're just really, really great. I've used this to improve PipeScript and Irregular, and this module we're going to come back to called PSSVG. But if you have lots of different files in a repository and lots of different directories, this can give you a better README experience by interlinking and adding context to each of these directories. It can make big unwieldy module directories easier to manage. REST is also really helpful. I mean, both as a general rule and in this case. I've added some new commands to LightScript, which is a module I have to control home lighting with almost no code. I found out that that did not support new fixtures. I was able to basically go create a new command to create new fixtures with nothing more than the REST attribute. And that's nice. I'm also going to be using it more in PS DevOps. If people are familiar with that project, great. Another good thing to know is that Irregular, PS DevOps, and PipeScript together are really, really fun. Irregular, I've covered in this user group before. It's a module for regular expressions, for creating them and using them. And well, there are lots of different things you can do with it and lots of good built-in ones, including regular expressions to parse Markdown. PipeScript gives me the tools to programmatically create commands. I mean, I guess we didn't kind of get into that sort of depth of it, but underneath all the different technique you saw, there are commands like new PipeScript and join PipeScript to create script blocks with a lot of flexibility and to join them together. There's also search PipeScript. But if you use Irregular and PipeScript together, you can basically parse out a lot of stuff. And I made this little module to make images called PSSVG. And it created about 3 million lines of PowerShell code from about 600 lines of script. So that's kind of cool. You know, I also use PS DevOps to talk to GitHub and Irregular parse the Markdown I found in there, and then PipeScript to go and recreate the commands. And now I have a whole new module with a whole new capability. And just because this is fun stuff too, we're going to bring that one up for a little bit of bonus round, because it happens to also have a nice README PS1 or MD. So we have two ways that we're generating here. One is to generate the table of all the different elements that are supported. But the one that I think is way cooler is there's this examples directory, and I'm able to actually just generate a table of each example with each of the different images interlinked. Let's go pop over to a random one, which this is not built with PipeScript. This is using a module that was built with PipeScript. So that created these SVG functions, which I can use in this format. And I'm able to have basically a definition of a image in a PowerShell file. And I'm able to do this in a way that keeps complete track of the web standard without having me ever open a textbook. Again, 3 million lines of code from 600 lines of code. That's a nice ROI. So that's what I've done so far with PipeScript. What can you or I do with PipeScript? Oh, basically anything. We use it to script more with less code. You can use it to mix and match PowerShell with dozens of languages. You can create your own transpilers to save yourself some scripting. Create a new protocol and add support for a technology. Yeah, you can create a new virtual protocol just for funsies, like that LightScript thing. I'm thinking I might make that a protocol just to see if it makes scripting groups of lights across different platforms more elegant than normal PowerShell would. You can be inspired and build whatever you imagine. And if you have trouble building it, you can file an issue. What's coming next? Well, this is a pretty long slide, but quite a bit is the short version. There's going to be more protocol support coming. I'm looking at WebSockets, Bluetooth, and MQTT in particular. I'd love to be able to just succinctly work with all of those technologies in PowerShell. I'm going to be adding new capabilities in the future. Build PipeScript is going to be getting a major upgrade, and that should allow me to transpile new categories of things like modules and function or files and directories. Be also be looking at adding phases to the build. A preprocessor is eventually coming as well, and that will open up whole new sets of capabilities past where we already are. There's going to be new keywords coming, although I'm not sure how many of them I'm ready to share yet. I will say that suggestions are very welcome. There's going to be new things to transpile. I'd already talked about directories, files, and modules all being on that list. And limited language embedding and translation. This one's a really cool big one, but if I'm, say, building a C# application and I am using PipeScript and that PipeScript returns a script block, well, I can call a script block from C#, can't I? So I can just literally pop that into there and embed the script block and call it and be done. And I can make it efficient if I'd like. Beyond that, because the AST is such a thorough form of self-discoverable syntax, it should be possible to basically turn PowerShell into other languages entirely. Like if I'm looking at, $A plus $B, that's not a statement that's terribly hard to translate from PowerShell into any language. And because I can look at the AST and say, oh, it's a $A plus $B sort of deal, that's easier to do for languages, at least in part, than it would be if I was trying to build something like PipeScript on top of anything other than PowerShell. So the past of PowerShell has been really exciting. It's gotten a whole bunch of different technologies brought together under one roof. It's built a flourishing ecosystem, even though that ecosystem is still a little isolated. The future and present of PowerShell and PipeScript are incredibly exciting. The present is filled with lots of different new capabilities that you can play around with and things you can build on top of. And the future is basically limitless. If we can take this dream to fruition, everybody that knows PowerShell will be able to program in every other language too. And that'll make us all very valuable and make PowerShell an even more useful part of the technological ecosystem than it already is. So the future is really, really bright thanks to PowerShell and PipeScript together. And hopefully you'll be able to be inspired and find a few things to get interested in. Go ahead and get PipeScripting. And hopefully this has given you a bit of inspiration. Please give it a try. You can go there at github.com/startautomating/PipeScript. You can file issues if you have them. You can reach out if you need to. There's my email. I am often on the PowerShell Discord at Start Automating, and I am on Twitter, although not as much as I should be, at James Brew. And that's it. That's the slide deck. That's the brief high-level intro to PipeScript. Awesome. Questions, comments, thoughts?
That was great. That was excellent walkthrough. Anybody have any questions as we start to wrap this up? Thank you, James. Really appreciate the demo and what this PipeScripting is showing us away. It's really cool, as well as the other modules you have like PSSVG and PS DevOps and so on. Awesome. I'm going to be playing with the README within the next probably by tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to that.
What are you going to use it for?
I have no idea, but I'm gonna look and see how it works. We've got a hand up, so let me see if I can ask to unmute. See if this works. Hello.
Oh, hi, this is Ian. I wanted to ask, I'm not sure if this is specifically a PipeScript question, but the latest version of .NET runs fine on WebAssembly, or it compiles to WebAssembly and runs fine on a browser. So would that mean PowerShell would run on a browser as easily?
I have seen people actually pack up the whole runtime of PowerShell in exactly that form. I haven't gotten it to it yet, but please file an issue. That is the exact sort of capability that I'm talking about being able to do. So essentially, like, if you think of it this way, any PowerShell script can be wrapped any number of ways to produce an experience, right? Like if you take the example that I already had for bash or batch, that's really easy to get. You've already got a script in one language that calls a script in another. Great, right? But if you have an executable, you can also proxy the command line arguments down to PowerShell. If you wanted to make an add-on to the Azure CLI, you might need to do something like that, right? Like you would essentially, you're going to have various points where you're going to be calling down to PowerShell to be able to wrap PowerShell to accomplish a given thing. And this should make all of those points easier. It's just a matter of how much code would basically be behind the curtain. So for HTTP, very little. For UDP, quite a bit. For, say, running stuff in Node.js and back, probably a lot more. But being able to ingest a WebAssembly would be a goal, and being able to create a WebAssembly from PowerShell would be a goal. Does this make sense? To answer your question.
Yes, it does. I pasted the, I got muted again. So I pasted the WebAssembly discussion. It's not yet an issue. Basically, somebody pointed out that, Python can already be compiled to WebAssembly. And I pasted a REPL link. They had so there is some work there, but yeah, I wish there was some more visibility, and someday it'll.
Yeah, just to echo what James was saying, I've seen a bunch of people doing a lot of things with trying to do with PowerShell and WebAssembly. I don't believe it's on the roadmap for the PowerShell team. There's things like .NET Interactive Notebooks, which also came out of something called try.net, where you can do C# in an HTML page. Where
oh yeah, thank you for reminding me about that. I keep meaning to add Jupyter support.
So that's
give me an issue, buddy.
Yeah, I'm all right. So but so I know that they want to be able to run some things like the .NET interactive pieces in WebAssembly and they're also looking at the .NET try.net stuff that they did, taking that to WebAssembly. And I've asked them where PowerShell fits into that, but it doesn't look like the core of PowerShell is going to run there and has yet. So opening up these kinds of things that you have here on the repo are good. We can get on there and we can vote those up, and we'll see where it goes, but nothing yet.
Yeah, and it does bring up another fair point. Like, one of the major benefits of PipeScript is that it can be more nimble than PowerShell. Meaning, it's going to take the PowerShell team to quite a while to kind of change the language in its current form. And if you look at the kind of analog here, TypeScript iterates much more quickly than the JavaScript's EMCA standards, right? So TypeScript will add features, and 3 or 4 years later, JavaScript will add the same features, right? So hopefully that sort of pattern can develop, but even if it can't, there's nothing stopping TypeScript from adding a new feature. There's nothing stopping PipeScript from adding a new feature. So if you have a compelling enough argument for a thing you want to be able to do, I want to be able to figure out how to do it. Beyond that, because it's extensible, as I talked about with Doug's hypothetical little transpiler, all you got to do is have a PSX, PS1 and tag PipeScript in your module manifest, and boom, you can extend it in any module. I'm looking to figure out how to better support the ecosystem around there, but there would be a lot of benefit to being able to just say, I want to turn it into a WebAssembly, and here are the 5 different ways that I can do that. Or I don't want to turn it into a WebAssembly, but I want a WebAssembly with the same signature of my PowerShell commands, right? all of these things should be possible with enough creativity and the right engine. And I'm trying to make sure that I build the right engine and enable the creativity and figure out essentially, does it go in the core of the engine or does it go in a module that is used by this engine?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for the question. That was really good. I need to jump off. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Keep an eye on the meetup. See if there's any other speakers coming up that you want to join in, watch present. Thanks again to James. Really appreciate it.
Anytime.
And if anybody has any speaker or topic that you'd like to hear, feel free to drop it on the meetup or drop an email to me, and we can get people on here to talk about these things. All right.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much. I'll stop sharing now.
Okay. I'll talk to you later. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
All right. Take care.
Bye.